Hi guys, Mr. Simons here. I'm going to talk about Ransom, part 3. So let's get stuck into it. You'll notice that in Ransom we've got these parallel characters. We've got Achilles on one side and we've got Priam on the other. But when we look at the Queen, we've also got this idea of parallel characters. And we've got protagonists who mirror each other in many ways. So let's have a look at some of those. Achilles on the left mirrors Priam on the right. So we've got that juxtaposition of leadership and similarities and differences between the leaders and how they act and how they respond. But we also have Patroclus on Achilles' side, so he's his best mate and someone who he confides in and really loves. But we've also got on Priam's side, we've got Hecuba. In a similar way, he goes to her to seek advice and counsel and convince her. So we've got this idea of having to persuade and feeling pressure from Patroclus and Hecuba and our main characters there. So what I want you to do with that is I want you to find quotes relating to how Patroclus forces Achilles to let him take the Myrmidons into battle. And then I want you to find quotes relating to Hecuba disagreeing with Priam's plan and urging him not to go. In the Queen, we've got Blair and Queen Elizabeth. Friers makes it a point to set these two characters up in opposition to each other from the very start. We've got the Queen sitting in her ceremonial, throne. She's looking very stiff, and she's doing her duty and having her portrait done. And she's watching Blair, and he's just won the election. So we've set up these two leaders in opposition to each other, just as in Ransom. And alongside those characters, we have the spouses of those two. So we've got Sherry and we've got Prince Philip. So they parallel each other. The key figures, the protagonists, parallel each other, and in that we can draw comparisons between the two and their leadership style and the tension between the two. But we also have advice given from their spouses, just as we see in Ransom. So Cherie praises Tony for being a great modernizer, and so she is pushing on Tony Blair to modernize and to actually confront the Queen on being too traditional. Whereas Prince Philip, on the other hand, really grumpy, and he has these wonderful moments where he's getting really fed up with the modernizer calling them while they're away on holiday in Balmoral. And he's really pushing the traditional line, protocol, and what as it should be. So what I want you to do with that is find quotes relating to Cherie's anti-monarchist attitude. We see this the first time they visit the palace, and find quotes relating to Prince Philip's grumpy attitude to Blair interrupting. I thought it was interesting when we're looking at part 3 here, we've got Somax who comes into the mix as well. So you might want to pause your video now and just answer some of those questions. Where does Somax fit? Who does he parallel? Does he parallel Priam, Achilles? Does he resemble anything to do with Blair and the Queen? How would you put him in that kind of parallel character kind of category? Who does he mirror? Who does he contrast? Let's have a look at the plot points. So this is the whole chapter and what happens in the chapter, just in a nutshell. It begins with Priam and Somax's cart fording the Scamander, the river. They stop to eat. Priam refuses Somax's pikelets. He doesn't really understand, this whole world of Somax, and he's not really familiar with this new Idaeus that he says, his herald. He's this new man. He knows he's a common man who doesn't really know about the ways of royalty, but he likes simple, homely things. Priam eats a pikelet and he enjoys it, so he's actually starting to appreciate some of the things that Somax appreciates. Priam sits with his feet in the water and begins to appreciate the simple things around him, and he's noticing the water and the fish and the pikelets, just as he watched Somax do. He contrasts this with his unnatural ceremonial role. So the third person narration kind of goes in his head, and as he's reflecting on the nature that he's in and how it's so different from what he's used to. Somax kind of runs his mouth a bit. He just talks, he kind of prattles on, and Priam reflects on Somax's understanding of common things, that Somax is talking and talking and talking, but he seems to know a lot about a lot of different things, and he's interested in things. And he develops a respect for Somax and Somax's understanding of things. Somax talks about his sick granddaughter. His sons are both dead, and fatherhood is a developing connection between these two as they contrast the way they father their children. Priam reflects on his own children. It's mentioned in there that he's got around 50 children, and there's this tension about Somax having a deep understanding and intimate relationship with his kids, whereas Priam has a very ceremonial relationship with his children. Somax really goes into great detail about his son. Priam reflects that he does not know his sons very well. Somax talks about that once he hit his son, and it was a really horrible, violent moment between them. But Priam's reaction to that is really interesting, in that he sees there's an intimacy in that. Even in Somax's regret that he hurt his son, there's an intimacy there that Priam has never felt before. Somax also tells of his second son dying in the river. He's dragged underneath by Beauty, one of the mules. Actually, Somax's favourite mule. So Beauty is responsible for the death of his second son. Hermes appears. It's this odd moment. This childlike figure kind of appears in disguise, and he calls himself Orchilus. It's an odd name to call yourself. He's play acting a threat, like he jumps up with his knife and as though he's going to hurt them. He gives away, that he knows about the gold and the journey. So already you think, hang on, like, how would you know? So he's not really an earthly figure, but he acts as though he's just an officer from Achilles' army. He acts like that. They cross the river, and eventually, after some low talk about Somax, Hermes reveals himself to the pair. Hermes kind of guides them through the river, and Priam and Somax are a bit suspicious at first, and Somax doesn't want to actually follow him, thinking that you're leading me down the wrong path here. And so Somax goes to check Hermes' directions. Hermes gives directions from in front of the cart. Somax gets out and feels his way and confirms that, Hermes has given the right instructions, or Orchilus at the time. Hermes gives Somax some good news about his granddaughter. He reveals himself shortly after, but he says that he reveals himself just before this, but he reveals that the granddaughter is going to be well. Priam feels blessed by this, and he is encouraged. There's this cheeky moment where Hermes calls him father, and Priam is tired, but he views Hermes' interaction as a sign of the gods are on his side. He's also really chuffed that he's got Somax beside him. They enter the gate of the Greek camp, and there's this huge bar that goes across the gates of the camp, and it's broken and it cracks. There's this huge noise, and the whole camp kind of wakes up and looks on. So that's what happened in the chapter, and that's right at the end, the crack of the gates, and then Somax and Priam enter. Some of the symbols here that you might want to explore. Priam is referred to as looking like a child all this time, an obedient toddler, which is an interesting thing, and I think it relates back to when Priam talks about his childhood, and that maybe he feels so out of place. So Priam is used to being in that royal realm, that royal sphere, but he's out. He is in disguise as a common person, and he's really out of his element. So he's described as being like a child. The pikelets are a cute little one. You might have wondered when you're reading it, why are you going into so much detail about these pikelets and the way they're made, and the daughter-in-law, Somax's daughter-in-law? This is a symbol of Priam's lack of understanding of how things come into being. He doesn't even know how a pikelet is made, like a pancake. He doesn't even know how they're made. He doesn't even know the ingredients that go into it, which shows that he's coddled and pampered. But he starts to develop, as he develops this relationship and he sees how Somax enjoys these simple things, Priam begins to enjoy these simple things as well. So he's coming from that ceremonial royal sphere and he's entering this more natural, earthy sphere. So maybe you can contrast the divine there with the earth. There's this moment where Priam sticks his feet in the water and the fish come up to him and they find his feet every bit as disappointing and without interest as the driver's. So that shows a connection between Somax and Priam. The fish don't know that he's a king. His feet are uninteresting. Who cares? Just like Somax's feet are a common man's feet. So it shows the humanity in both of them. And they're just people. They're just men to these fish. The fish don't know about royalty there. Throughout this chapter, there's this juxtaposition of the formal and informal, or I describe it in many ways here, man-made and the natural, and the divine, or the distant, or the organic and the present. So there's a few ways that you can kind of phrase that. Priam reflects on his relationship to other things in the world being full of formality. So when he is living his life, he is in the world of ceremonies, of high play. But sitting by the river and talking to this prattler, this chatterer, Somax, he actually develops this more human or genuine connection to the world around him, which is very distant to his royal sphere. You'll notice, maybe this threw you off a bit, again, in part 2, we've got this naming that happens. In part 3, we've also got this naming that happens. So Malouf is doing interesting things with names in part 3 as well. We also saw this in part 1 where Patroclus adopts the armor of Achilles and his whole army calls out Achilles. So he's renamed Achilles as well. So there's this interesting thing about names, and Orchilus arrives, but he's really Hermes. We've got Somax, but throughout the chapter you'll notice that he's called the carter, the driver, and Idaeus. He's called those different names, which I thought was interesting. So when he's called the carter and Idaeus, those are his positions in society. Priam is a king, his position is king. Somax is the man's name. So there's interesting ways of naming throughout. And then I'm just comparing those to part 2, Jove, Zeus, Podarces, Priam, the chicken hawk and the eagle at the end of part 2. Let's have a look at some parallels between these with Priam and Somax. I asked you earlier to pause it and just have a look at these two and make your own notes, but we've got the position there, cart, driver and king. We've got children, so 50 children, but he does not know them. He has many children. He's got a lot, he's a king. And Somax is a humble guy. He's got 2 sons. They're very precious to him. And they're both dead. But both fathers feel the sting of losing their sons, but in quite different ways. One's ceremonial and one's very personal. One's able to get on with life. Somax is able to get on with life. But Priam is stuck. He sees his son Hector down there and he's got to go and find him. So Somax is wrapped up in Priam's quest to actually connect with his son, but it's all a very ceremonial thing, very distant to Somax's relationship with his sons. Priam talks about speaking, so he speaks when necessary. Silence, not speech, was what was expressive, so your silence is actually expressing your feelings, whereas Somax, he's a chatterer. He talks all the time and he's interested and curious about the world. Priam is a man of ceremony, of high position, and he does what is expected of him, except for this moment where he's actually off in the cart with Somax. This is not what is expected of him to do. Somax He's a man of common life, a low position, but he enjoys it. He is really, he's not at ease with everything that's happened to him, but he gets on with it, and he actually appreciates those little things in life, like those pikelets, and he enjoys his daughter-in-law in the way his son made this little feature to the oven so that they could be cooked, in this special way that's nicer. So he appreciates the life that he's got. Priam has a ceremonial relationship with his children, whereas Somax has this personal relationship to his sons. And I was talking about before about that regretted violence. Somax has regret about being violent towards his son, especially now that he's dead. But this is envied by Priam. Priam doesn't have any concept of that intimacy, even the violent stuff. They both have tempers, so they're both. It's mentioned early on that they both have a temper. Hermes actually brings this to light later on, that Somax is known to go down to the tavern and be a drinker, and he has a temper on him. It's interesting, Priam, though, is not content to let things be. He must act, which is why they're out in the cart. It's why they're on the road. Whereas Somax goes with the flow in life. He's resigned to it. He's in a low position. He can't do anything about his son's dying. There's nothing that can be done, but he kind of goes with the flow. Let's compare those parallels that we just made between Priam and Somax to the Queen. And some of these are really good connections, I think, but some of them don't quite fit. But you're required in this to have a look at those similarities and differences, okay? So for the Queen, she's got 4 children, but for Diana, Diana is a key child of hers, but she is a daughter-in-law, and now she's a former daughter-in-law. And the Queen talks of her as a former HRH. She says that former HRH. She's not an HRH anymore, Her Royal Highness. About speaking, we've got Priam and the Queen mirroring each other in that they speak when it's appropriate to do so, but the Queen speaks according to protocol when she's called to do it. But she's also in this idea of silence, not speech, is expressive, because she's not supposed to grieve and cry and weep. We've got the Queen in a position of ceremony as well, a figurehead. She does what the rules allow her to do. And when something new comes up, like Diana's death and the reaction of the public and Blair, she doesn't really know what to do because there's no precedent for it. So a precedent is an example that's happened before. There's that example that happened before, I'll do what was done before. So when something new happens, she's not sure what to do. She also has a ceremonial relationship to her children, but she does relate to them personally as well, and she takes her grandchildren off to Balmoral. But I thought that was an interesting thing, that we rarely actually see a scene with the Queen with her grandchildren, but the grandchildren are used as the excuse as to why she's not in London, why she's in Scotland, in her home Balmoral in Scotland. Different to Priam and Somax, she keeps her temper. She's not allowed to express anger, and she does it. And then she fulfills her role. At the end of the film, we see her reflect on the vows that she took. She's there with the Queen Mother, her own mother, and they reflect on the vow that Queen Elizabeth made, and she quotes it by heart. She remembers her vow. So in that, she's in every moment, in every way, trying to fulfill her role as Queen, as she understands it. Which is where this modernizing of the monarchy creates tension for her. She doesn't understand how she should modernize, because all she's got is tradition, and all she's got is precedent and what has happened before, and how she should behave in that way. Let's look at some quotes. I've got quite a few quotes, so I'm going to go through them quite quickly. Your job in each of these is pause when you find an interesting one. Use the vocabulary at the bottom of the page in order to explain or expand on that quote. Please embed the quote into your sentence as well when you're analyzing it or explaining what it means or what it symbolizes. You might need to look these words up in a dictionary. I should just stay here in the wagon with the body of my son. Notice that Priam views the wagon, all the treasure in the wagon, as his son. It symbolizes his son. All that treasure in the back is what his son is worth. His heart softened by fellow feeling, since he too was a father. So Somax is thinking about Priam's reluctance to get off the cart to rest. And Somax reflects like, oh, I know what it is to be a father, and I know why you don't want to get off that wagon, because that to you is where your son is. Somax's speech is positive and loving, so all throughout the beginning of this chapter we've got Somax speaking nicely. He calls his mule my love. He encourages Priam by saying, have a nice rest here. It's really kind of gentle in his interactions with Priam. He calls the fish little ones, so these are all terms of endearment. That'll do you no end of good, he tells Priam. So he's speaking to a king, someone who is much higher in position, in a very gentle and encouraging way, and it's super positive and loving. Throughout the chapter we've got Priam is like a child, or like an obedient toddler. Somax has no notion of what was proper, so this is Priam's opinion of what Somax is like, and his lack of understanding about royal things, but he likes it because he had so much tact in the way he made his suggestions. To have tact is to have an understanding and to do it nicely in a diplomatic way. It was not reverence he lacked, only a knowledge of the forms. The forms are like the way to do it, protocol. In the world the fellow moved in, such forms might not be altogether useful. So he's saying that in Somax's life and in his world, understanding protocol and the rules that I know as the king, they're probably not useful for him, so he doesn't need them, he doesn't know them. There's some different vocab at the bottom there, guys. For Somax, the common things like the pikelets are a source of joy they bring to the heart. So he appreciates the joy that the pikelets bring to the heart. Priam this is really telling about the connection between a king's divine nature, so he's been put there by the gods, therefore his position is divine. But then Priam is going into the earthly realm, which is what Somax understands. That's the human realm, that's out in nature, doubly tied both to the gods and to the earth. So Priam feels his connection to earth, feels his connection to nature, but he's tied to the gods through his kingship, his crown that he wears. Priam saw that what was new could also be pleasurable. So this idea of newness is confounding for the queen as well. What was new could also be pleasurable. He doesn't know, what it feels to put your feet in a river and to have fish come up to it and eat pikelets in such humble way, but he's realizing, hang on, this is new to me, but it's good and it's okay. The fish, were not in the royal sphere. So in the novel it says they were not in the royal sphere. So all this nature that he's in is a new experience for him, and it's not like him. All these things they don't reflect him, and they don't put him as the center. The fish actually sniff his, they have a look at his feet and they nick off. So actually their attention is not fixed on the king. He was symbolically at the center, as form and his own royal dignity demanded. He belonged to a world of ceremony, of high play, that was eternal and had nothing to do with the actual and the immediate. The actual and the immediate, those are things like eating pikelets and being in the moment and putting your feet in the river and just enjoying now. Outside his royal sphere, in the nature, everything was just itself. So in the royal sphere, not everything is itself. It's actually a symbol of something else. So in the royal sphere, the king represents the gods, and he represents Troy, and he represents the people, and he has a position to fulfill. But in nature, Everything just is what it is. And this is a profound thing for a king. Most surprising of all was the way the fellow let his tongue run on, with no fear at all. It seemed of being taken for mere rattle or chatterer. In his world, a man spoke only to give shape to a decision he had come to, or to lay out an argument for or against. And we know Priam does this. He's looking at Somax and thinking, you're just running your mouth, like you're talking about all this stuff, and he's actually intrigued by it. He likes it, but he reflects that when Priam speaks, when he speaks as the king, the reason why he does it is to convince someone of a decision and have an argument. And he's just done that with Hecuba. He's just about to do it with Achilles. He's just about to argue and maintain his position. Different vocab at the bottom. Silence, not speech, was what was expressive. Power lay in containment, in keeping hidden and therefore mysterious one's true intent. A child might prattle till it learn better. So actually, this mirrors what the Queen does, Queen Elizabeth. Power lay, or what she thinks her role is to contain her emotions, to keep it hidden. And that's what the English are very known for, this stiff upper lip kind of, don't express yourself. But the public wanted and demanded her to do that. But out here, if you stopped and listened, everything prattled. So there's that comparison between nature and where Priam is in this new experience. Everything's prattling. The river is talking, the leaves in the trees and the wind, everything's prattling just like Somax. Priam says, the narrator says he knew things about Somax. Somax was a humble common guy, but he had a deeper understanding of some things than Priam did. I thought this was interesting. Malouf uses one-word sentences at certain points, and they really highlight, in this case, I thought these examples that I've given is the progression in Priam's thinking. Himself, interest, curiosity. So Priam is moving away from himself, and himself as the center, and being interested about the world. I thought that was interesting. Just use, why is he using these one-word sentences there? He's breaking the rules of syntax and sentence structure. The blessed and unblessed. So Somax is responding to his children, about his children. He's blessed with children, but they've died. So he's been blessed and unblessed. I don't know what I've done if the gods hadn't thought again and been kind to us. But the truth is, we don't just lie down and die, do we, sir? We go on. This is Somax's attitude. He's been through all these traumatic experiences with his sons dying and his granddaughter's sick, and he's not having a good time. But he says the truth is, we don't lie down and die because of these horrible things that happen. We go on. But this contrasts Priam has stopped. Priam has not been able to go on because his son Hector is being dragged out there. He needs to bury his son. So it's not like that for Somax. But Somax was able to bury his children. Priam has not. And so this contrast between the two. It also contrasts Achilles in that he cannot move on. He's so grieved by the death of Patroclus that he's dragging Hector's body every day. He can't move on from his own rage and grief. He had lost so many sons in these last months and years, all of them dear to him, or so he had told himself. So he says things like, they were dear to me, and his understanding of what it is to be close to his children is not what he sees in Somax. Somax has a very different way of explaining his grief and his connection to his children. So it makes Priam question his own relationship with his children. A couple more quotes, guys. Some different vocab there as well. All of that was so personal, and the man's memory of so present. So Priam is reflecting on Somax being able to understand that grief and express it. He knew what it was to lose a son. Really did mean that the same for him as it did for the driver. So did it mean the same thing for him as the driver? their relationship to him was formal and symbolic. Priam reflects on his own son and sons and their relationship to him being formal and symbolic. Royal custom, the habit of averting his gaze. So when he sets the funeral pyre alight, so he's burying his sons, he's kind of burn their bodies, and this is a ceremonial ritual, but he averts his gaze. He doesn't look. He doesn't watch it. It's not intimate. He looks away, because that's what royal custom is. I ended up taking her head in my arms and sobbing fit to break my heart. Somax here he finds his son's body, his second son, and then he finds that Beauty had dragged him through the river and actually killed him, and he says he wanted to punch her in the face. He wanted to punch his mule in the face, but he doesn't. He weeps and he cries and he holds her. So his reaction is love, even though his heart is breaking. Priam and Somax travel closer to the Greek camp, and the landscape lies in utter devastation. Priam has seen nothing of this because he's removed from that reality. Because he's a king, he's removed from that. Somax is not too particular about the law. This is Hermes having a dig at Somax, and he shames him in front of Priam. We're a long time in the earth, father. Plenty of silence there. So Priam is having a discussion with Hermes, and Hermes is making a point about death and living. You need to move on here, perhaps. You need to move on because we're a long time dead. Hermes, this is the description of Hermes as the celestial joker, messenger, thief, trickster, escort of souls to the underworld. Now, I tell you what, have a look at each of those ones. Messenger, he brings messages to Priam and Somax. Thief, Priam and Somax are wondering whether he's going to steal the gold or not. He's a trickster. He deceives them at the start. He is an escort of souls to the underworld. He's not quite taking them to the underworld, though, but he's taking them to Achilles. So it's an interesting way of describing him, and all of those elements are present in the novel. What strengthened him was the presence at his side of his good Idaeus, who seemed in no way intimidated by their escort's transformation, so Hermes revealing himself as the god. As if the arrival of a god on the scene was in his life a quite ordinary occurrence, one more eventuality to be recognized and taken account of in a world of endless surprise and accident. I know it's quite a long quote there, and there are bits that are really good for you to use, but it's a really interesting quote towards the end of this part. Alright guys, just a few comparisons to the Queen before we finish. So under that theme of parenting and family, Priam learns what being a father is according to Somax. So it's Somax's view on fatherhood, which is very different from Priam's understanding. Different from his ceremonial relationship with his many children. So the comparison to Queen Elizabeth there is Queen Elizabeth seeks to protect her grandchildren while they are initially grieving, but there is hardly a scene of them together. I thought that was interesting. There's hardly a scene of the Queen and her grandchildren together. It's mainly all about the Queen. Queen Elizabeth is in a few scenes with her son Charles, and Charles is trying to modernize, and there's this moment where Blair reflects on Charles's phone call to him. Charles is saying, I'm going to be a modernizer. I'm on your side, Blair. And Blair says, what kind of family is this? Really making the point that this family is not a really cohesive family. They're not close to each other. Charles is essentially stabbing Queen Elizabeth in the back here. The god's intervention. So Hermes arrives to escort Priam and Somax. It's playful and cheeky and mocking, but helps them to get through the river and keeps them safe. So just with the god's intervention with the Queen, we've got these really short and pithy statements about let's leave God out of this. Blair says, let's leave God out of this. So it's not really similar. There's not a lot of similarities with gods coming in and intervening, but the Queen is God's representative on earth. So she is her position is that divine intervention there. And she's not really sure, where's God's place in this, or where's her place in this. The idea of duty. Priam is stoic and stiff in his position. He's used to the grand ceremony. Queen Elizabeth is reserved in her opinions, but does her duty. So here are two quotes that reflect that. Ransom: he was symbolically at the centre as form and his own royal dignity demanded, belonging to a world of ceremony, of high play, that was eternal and had nothing to do with the actual and immediate. And in the Queen is talking to her mother, Queen Mother, at the end of the film, towards the end, and she says, "Nowadays people want glamour and tears, the grand performance. I've never really been good at that." She says, "I'd prefer to keep my feelings to myself. Duty first, self second. That's all I've ever known." So just this last point, the natural world, so this is about position for the characters. Where do they fit into the world? So is it in that divine or royal position, or is it the common man, the public? The natural world is unfamiliar to Priam. He marvels at the fish, the water, the nature. Queen Elizabeth is really at ease in nature itself. She loves to be in Balmoral, and she's quite fine when her car breaks down in the river, and she just sits there, and she's not really miffed about it. She just calls to be picked up. So she's at ease in that, but she's unfamiliar with the public's demand that she express grief so publicly. Priam, though, has expressed public grief. He's thrown dust on his head and wept in the street. So there's some contrast there. Thanks, guys. Look forward to part 4.